let's go back to John Murphy getting the job. So John, you were a player.
Yes.
Opportunity came up. I think you were only sort of 29, coming up to 30 to take on the team. Mark Boyland obviously hadn't joined the club at this point, but Collie was already there.
Yeah.
What was it like? Why did you decide to take that opportunity, which probably meant you were going to have to stop playing at quite a young age?
Well, it was strange initially because I'd played under Dennis Allen, and we had, quite a strong social group, and quite a good attitude amongst the group, and it was quite progressive. Dennis fell out with the board at the time, and Dennis and Colin Badger, who actually I got quite, personally friendly with, as quite a few of the players had done really. Then Dennis left, Alan Wood took over, and Alan and I became quite good friends. But I think that the one thing that Alan did, as a lot of managers do, it started to bring in a lot of players from his own kind of areas. And we just ended up with a lot of players from Birmingham that I felt that basically we were just going in the wrong direction. And I was quite close with a number of the directors, Arthur Haywood, Dave Courtney, Dave Hurd, etc. And I used to chat with Arthur quite regularly. And we got a series of bad results with Alan. And you could tell the players, you can always tell when a manager's got problems because the players start to take liberties. And it got as though we'd lose a game, and Alan lacked the capacity to make players genuinely feel the difference between a win and a defeat. And in the end, I think the board began to feel this. And Arthur one day said to me, when I was saying where we ought to go, and Arthur said to me, well, if you feel that strongly about it, then you do it. And literally that was the conversation we had, and I took it on without any idea of what it actually meant. But in the sense that I had a lot of ideas of where I thought we could go, but without any understanding of how we go there really. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, and Collie, I think Murph made you captain pretty early on, didn't he? After he started to focus on management. So before we come to Boylo, obviously was one of the big signings in the summer of '84. What do you remember about Murph making that transition from one of the respected players to suddenly becoming your gaffer?
Well, if I remember, Murph, I think the game, I think Alan Wood's last game was at Yeovil in the Trophy.
Was, yeah.
And if I remember, it was a bit of that day. There was a reunion of ex-Cheltenham Town players that come on the players' coach that day.
Yeah.
And I think we come away from Yeovil with a defeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a bit of a hoo-ha going on, if I remember, with Arthur about stopping for a pint on the way home to Cheltenham, which Arthur was for, and if I remember, Alan Wood was against. Would that be about right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. And that seemed to be the start of something happening. And Murph's right, there was the team spirit within that side then was not the best. And there were some good players there at the time, Murph, wasn't there?
There was, yeah.
Yeah.
There was, yeah.
And we just weren't clicking. And then Murph's first game in charge was Gloucester City on Boxing Day.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, we put in hell of a performance. And am I right in thinking we won 4-1?
4-1, yeah.
Yes, it was 4-1, yes.
Yeah, and deservedly so. There was a good crowd there, and you can you imagine the atmosphere in the changing room was so different to what we'd experienced with Alan. So from that, then it ticked a lot of boxes, and it was a case then a good result, and then move on, and then basically get to the end of the season and bring a few new players in, Murph, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so summer, I mean, things improved results-wise and finished the season strongly. And then, Mark, let's bring you in here. So you were one of the big signings of that summer, along with Brian Hughes, who came in from Torquay, having previously been at Swindon. What do you remember about actually, how did your move to Cheltenham Town come about?
Well, I don't really remember being a big signer. I didn't class myself as a big signer at the time. I'd spoken to Murph the season before, I think just after we'd played Cheltenham in the Midland Division.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think Murph asked me to come, and was I interested? And I'd said, well, I'm at Banbury now. I'm going to step Banbury to the end of the season. and which I did, and we stayed in contact. And then Murph invited me over in the summer to see the ground and everything. And you couldn't be anything but impressed. For a non-league club to have that sort of ground at that time was fantastic. And I just sort of jumped at the opportunity, really. I thought, well, I may as well come. If I'm not a success, I always go back to Banbury. But I decided to come, mainly through Murph and his perseverance to sign me, really.
Yeah, you mentioned the ground and being impressed by it, Mark, there. What sort of reputation did Cheltenham have as a non-league club then for people outside of Cheltenham? Was it quite a highly thought of club at that time?
Yeah, because it was always a nice place to go to. It's always, you've got, the floodlights in the corners, big floodlights and everything in the corners, the big main stand, and you didn't get that at many clubs. I've spent 4 seasons or more at Banbury, and they'd only got like a little stand. Oxford City only got a small stand at that stage. So to go somewhere like that, it just felt like a proper football club. And I hadn't met anybody at that point apart from Murph. So and then obviously signed, pre-season started. So
it was funny actually, because I knew I played against Boyland, and I knew it was of all the players I signed, there was only 2 players I knew would hit the ground running and would be huge for Cheltenham. One was Boyland, and one was Steve Brooks. And funny enough, when I went to watch, because at Banbury to watch Boylo, I remember as I walked in the ground, the first person I bumped into was George Rooney. And of course, George was managing Worcester at the time. And so George said to me, "What you're looking at?" And he was quite perceptive, George. Whoever I told him I was looking at, he knew I wasn't. And he said, "You're looking at Boyland." And this was before the game kicked off. But funny enough, I watched Boylo in the kickabout, and he struck, it's the first time I'd seen someone strike the ball powerfully with both feet. And I knew he was aggressive and also immense loyalty, because he'd stayed at Banbury when he could have easily said no. So I said to George, I said, "I don't fancy him, George." I said, I'm off. I don't like the look of him. And I actually went home and didn't watch the game. But it put George off the scent, because I met Boylo in the week and we signed him. So,
so Collie, can you remember when did you start to think, this team is obviously a lot of talented players and you finished the previous season well, but when did you start to think, Murph's got us onto a good thing here, we could be up there this season?
Well, we had a good group of players, and I would say that probably around that time, we probably had more local players within the squad than Murph than any other time at Cheltenham, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
we had the likes of Nick Jordan. Jordan and myself signed on the same day. There was Greek, Steve Scarrett, and other Tim Harris come in as well, and Cots, Nick Gazzard, he lived in Cheltenham, and the squad was basically built around a lot of local lads. And then you had the Swindon connection with Uzi, Abs, and Babbers. Babbers, well, if I remember, Babber lived in Cheltenham, didn't he?
He did eventually, yes. Yeah, he did, yeah.
So the nucleus was of a strong local, influx of local players. And Cheltenham ran a reserve team at the time as well, Murph, didn't they?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously there was a few of the lads that would come into the squad from that side as well.
People forget actually that, but at the start of that season, the plan was, to partner up Boylo with Nick Gazzard and Steve Cottrell, of those, because both of them, the one thing that the pair of them had is they were both really quick, and we thought with Boylo's strength and that as another dimension, but unfortunately both of them got injuries at different times and didn't play the roles that we expected them to play. But another one that came through who actually showed an enormous amount of early promise, but I felt never really was able to give it enough through his work and family, was Tim Bailiff. And Tim played a couple of games, and in those games he played, he did really, really well. But the one thing that you found is that it was interesting that a lot of the local players did quite well, but there was no substitute for a player that had come with just that little bit of experience. Baverstock, Hughes, both had a little bit of like a know-how. Even Collie had been to Swindon, and they just had that little bit of Football League grounding, which just gave them the edge all the time over the natural youngsters. Tommy Callahan came through and played regular games. You know, Ibbotson, Sean Whelan, lots of local players came through. But unfortunately, then like people like Hughes and Baverstock just had that little bit of nous that, you know, was able to give them that grounding, really.
Boylo, the team seemed, a lot of people chipped in that season, but the team seemed to be fairly settled with Collie and Stu Corns at centre half, and then the fullbacks were pretty settled, Bavers and Hughes in the middle. But you seem to have quite a few. You seem to have quite a few different partners up front that season with Nick Gazzard, Cottrell, Mark Hacker.
Yeah, at the start of the season, it was Nick Gazzard, and then he got injured. And then Murph signed Bernie Wright.
Yeah.
Who was a handful for anybody, really. As a
a
manager, I would have thought he was difficult, Carl, and Murph. But as a player, to play alongside, it took a lot of sort of pressure off me, really, because he seemed to be like the main fulcrum of, you know, holding the ball up, flicking it on, or whatever. And he was in people's faces a lot of the time. And he was good, decent to play with. You know, he was. I think he was at Everton when Murph.
I think he
at
was
one stage.
Yeah, I think he was. Yeah.
But Bernie was the first player to get transferred for £100,000 from Walsall to Everton.
Scored on his debut,
Good
didn't he? Scored on his debut, if I remember rightly, at Whaddon Road.
Yeah, well,
he probably did, mate.
Yeah.
I played with Bernie at Trowbridge for 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, like you say, Mark Hacker. He scored a few goals. He chipped in with some really important goals for us in cup games and things like that. And he came later on in the season. And no, it was varied amount of people who played up front, but that was down to a lot of injuries and people moving on. Really, I think we had a fair turnover of players, though, Murph, to be fair.
We did,
throughout the season.
Yeah, I think the thing is that the dilemma is that both Gazzard and Cottrell. I mean, Gazzard would have been a very good player if he hadn't have had a knee problem. And in those days, of course, you didn't get the early operations and the physiotherapy treatment that you get now. So a knee injury, I can't remember specifically what he did, but I don't think he ever played again, not at proper levels. And Steve Cottrell was a real enigma. Steve, I always felt he could be a good player. In fact, we kept him within the squad for virtually an entire season. And the first game he came back from injury, he actually was outstanding. But the problem was at the end of that season, then Steve wanted to play, and you know so he left, and Nick didn't play again. Mark Hacker, you know, came in really. Mark and Bernie came in just to kind of see us through certain periods because we always lacked that little bit of continuity. And in fairness to Mark Hacker, he stepped up 2 leagues, but I think he did score the goals, quite important goals that we hoped he would. And Bernie just gave us something different. He was fun and sociable off the field. He was tough, and of course, what he did then, he was a focal point, you know. And he certainly, when he was fit, he was a real handful. I could see what a good player he'd have been. The problem with Bernie was he could only play for like 3 or 4 games, and then he needed a bit of a break. But all the time, it was getting us closer to where we wanted to be, really.
But I think that's credit to you, Murph, as well, though, really, for sort of seeing these problems and picking another player, i.e. Mark Hacker, from 2 leagues down to come and play in a championship winning side. Yes. You know, I think you need to take a bit of credit for that.
Well, there's certainly, you know, that's the one part of the job that I never realised is the enormous amount. And it was quite funny the number of times I went to look at a player and then sign somebody else, you know. But of course, in those days, players are very keen to step up. You know, you don't like the problems, you know, so much nowadays. But if you found a jewel at a lower level, especially down in the southwest regions, you know, Taunton, Bridgewater, and all these clubs, Melksham, you know, Trowbridge, they were desperately keen to step up. And if you gave them that opportunity, in fairness, the majority of times the clubs were keen on it as well. So, but that's you know, the club went from strength to strength based on that, you know, turning it round. And where I thought we did very well over a number of years is we kept a core group of players and then only changed normally maybe 4 or 5, and but then the core would stay there for quite a long period of time. And if you look at that team, and then you look at the next 2 or 3 teams after that, the same principle applied. And I think that's where the club did well right through Steve Cottrell's era, whereby they had consistency and continuity of playing staff, and they weren't chopping and changing. And
yeah, Collie, you obviously been there the previous year and were signed by Alan Wood, and then in comes Mark Boyland, in comes Brian Hughes. I think they got 58 between them that season. So do you think those two was the big difference between what was becoming a good team and what was eventually a championship winning team? Well,
definitely. Boylo, you know, he scored, I think, 2-3 seasons on the banks for Cheltenham. He scored over 30 goals. And actually, I'd like to thank Boylo because he won me a bit of money on that score as well. Yeah.
Tell us about that, Collie. Tell us about that one.
Well, you know, you had the directors, and always had a bit of banter with the directors, and Dave Budd would be giving it after the game, and Boylo this and Boylo that, and I said, yeah, you get 30 goals. No, you won't. I said, well, we get 30 goals. So we had a little wager, and if I remember Boylo, I bought you a drink or 2 as normal.
Well, I don't know. I can't remember that goal.
No, as I said, you know, Boylo come on board and did what he did, but the one unsung hero really was Hughesy. You know, Hughesy come in, and I don't think in his career, what did he end up with that year? 20 odd goals from
27, 28 goals, I think.
From
midfield.
Yeah, well, as I said, he was like a ghost. You never saw him for 89 minutes, and then in the 90th, he'd pop up and score.
There was another thing with Hughesy that few people realise. I think one stage had set a record for consistent appearances. You know, he never missed a game. I mean, and the one thing, you know, he wasn't a physically strong player, but he competed in all those levels, and he stepped up. And amazingly, as soon as we went into the league above, he scored on the first game of the season and just continued it on himself. But you know, usually, and that was another thing with the majority of the team. I mean, certainly Scarrett, Corns and Collicutt were and in fairness, Boylo, Hughesy and Bavers, who were suspended all the time, but they were never injured. And so the core of it, you could actually, providing the people were good socially, and I know it's a strange thing to say, but providing they got on with people, you could actually put anybody into that small group, because the core, you knew the core were good enough. And a lot of people came into that little group and actually flourished in it. But, you know, it was built a lot on, you know, I've got a feeling that season, we had 3, 4 goalkeepers. But
name them,
sorry?
Name them.
I remember, Stuart Martin, Timmy, we brought Timmy Harris in late, didn't we?
Yeah. And,
you know, but
Mossy
didn't change.
Who's the 4th one, Murph?
Crikey me. Oh, Mossy.
No. You've already Mossy. Mossy, Harry, Stuart. You got the 4th one?
I can't remember it.
Les White.
Turned into a quiz now, colleague.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a good question.
Les White.
Oh, Les White, yes. Kidderminster.
Yeah.
2-0 up.
Yeah.
2-0 up at half time.
Yeah.
Not as bad as, just a quick story. I signed Dave Mogg, and it was a celebrated signing from Bath. It was the most money the club had ever paid for a goalkeeper. We played Kidderminster on the Tuesday night, Mogg's debut, and we were 2-0 up. We eventually drew 2-2, and cross from way out to the right-hand side, came in and dropped in the back post. And I said to Moggy, what about that when he came off? What do you think that last one, Moggy? What happened there? And he said, I can't see in the dark, Murph. He said, I've got problems with contact lenses. I said, the club paid all that money for a goalkeeper and he can't see in the dark. And I said, Moggy, whatever you do, don't tell anybody that story. And he was serious as well. So I never even told Arthur that, but he couldn't see.
Oh dear.
It's the days before a medical, was it?
He played like he couldn't see half the time as well, didn't he?
Let's can we just have a chat about the Southern League Cup that season, because I think it was probably a bit more of a prestigious competition then than it is now, wasn't it? The Southern League Cup, and you had 12 games in that competition that season, going all the way to the final. How important was that, first of all, to you, John, as manager, and then Collie and Boylo as players? Did you really want to win that as well, or was it all about winning the league?
No, it was massive, because I felt that anything that we were in, we should compete in it. And I always felt this as a player. We played in the Birmingham Senior Cup and all these things, and we always used to try and win them, always. And I felt, that competition, it wasn't like nowadays where teams rested players. They didn't. You played your team. But I genuinely felt that we had a really good opportunity, and I felt we were really unfortunate. We played Fisher at just about the wrong time when they were looking to try and prove something, and over the two games, it was just we never, for some peculiar reason, we never really got going in either game. I don't know why, but it was a strange place to go. I mean, they'd lock you in the changing rooms before the game to say, well, you can only come out when we let you out because there's likely to be crowd trouble and all this sort of thing. And Fisher was always that type of atmosphere. Not a comfortable atmosphere, but it was, that's the way they wanted to be. They were just starting out and starting their way, and they did, didn't they? They went on to play.
Yeah, they went up. Yeah.
Levels. But no, we definitely wanted to win it, and I still think to this day it was disappointing. In that sense.
Collie, as captain, I think you had a national anthem before the game, didn't they, in the final, and you introduced the players to. I think Ted Croker was there.
Yeah.
Did that final defeat affect you at all with the last remaining league games, or make you more determined?
I think it made it a lot more difficult. It's, we've spoken lightly, but our run-in, I think we played 8 games in 14 days, and that's come about because of the success of the club. And players want to play, and you listen in this day and age about players moaning about playing 2 games in 7 days. And when you consider that we played 8 and 14 days, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, that took some doing, but the players, they wanted it, and they wanted to win a game of football. And, the club wanted to go on, they wanted to go that step further. And I think, the one game that sticks out for me, Murph, I don't know if you can remember it, is the RS Southampton game on a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
At home, and the crowd that night would have probably been only about 500 or 600. But if I remember, Nick Jordan scored the winner, and it's one of the biggest cheers I think I've ever witnessed in all my time I've been to Wobden Road, and that seemed to trigger things on. And then it went on to the next level. And the big thing that came with what was happening at the football club, I think that the local people of Cheltenham come out in numbers to back us. And you only got to look at, especially the Overchurch game at home, they turned out in their thousands. So, it's a big pat on the back for everybody concerned. And there was a closeness as well between the supporters and the players of that day. Would you agree with that, Murph?
It would. And it was interesting because the Fisher game was a problem because it had given you the feeling you couldn't win anything. That was a dilemma of doing that. And so you thought, well, what's the reaction going to be? We looked a little bit leg weary. They were quite cute and quite clever, and they were dirty as well. And they were just the wrong sort of team for us to be playing at that time. We could have done without it. But what worried me is how we would recover. And I have to say, I felt very deflated, and I thought, then I could see us slipping away because I wasn't sure about the fitness levels of a number of players. I think we played 2 different goalkeepers in the 2 legs. Timmy Harris played in the first leg, I think, or the second leg. And I don't think he played in the first leg. So, we were getting just a little bit kind of patchy in the way we were. And the recovery from that was, quite amazing, really. And the only thing I think we didn't have a great deal of time to recover. But it's strange, actually, of that season, apart from the last game and the Overchurch game, I remember more about the Fisher games than I remember than the others, which is which is quite strange, really.
Yeah, Boyd, I would like to ask you about the Gloucester game, if you remember it. I know you're a modest man, but a hat-trick against Gloucester, I think, in the run-in. During that run, Collie mentioned about of 8 games in 14 days. How clearly do you remember that one?
Yeah, I can remember that pretty clearly, really. And also the build-up to that, really, as the guys were saying earlier, you know, the Southern League Cup. I think our first game in that Southern League Cup, we got beat, I think it was 5-1 at Bromsgrove. Absolutely whacked. And that was a big eye-opener for us. We had tough games against VS Rugby later in the competition. But I think the games that Collie was mentioning, where it was Saturday, Sunday, consecutive weekends, in some respects, brought us all together. You know, we were travelling together, staying overnight on a Saturday, playing again on a Sunday. And I think that just sort of seemed to bond us a lot more as a side. And then moving on to that particular game at Horton Road, it was a hat-trick that I'll remember for a long time now. I think it was left foot, right foot, and a header. I think so, something like that. But and we were 3-0 up and cruising, and then for the last 15-20 minutes, we conceded 2 sloppy goals, and we were hanging on at the end, really hanging on. But it was quite sweet.
But I think at that time also, I think when we played Gloucester, they weren't completely out of the frame. I don't think. I think they were probably too far away to consider winning it, but they always felt they could do enough to stop us winning it as well. And I remember at that time, Gloucester was spending quite a lot of money building quite a strong team, and you know that they were quite a powerful side at that time. And I think they had ambitions of their own, actually.
Question for you, John. Question for you.
Yeah.
What? No, John, JP. What do you remember about that season?
Unfortunately, I was 5 years old, so I've enjoyed chatting to Collie and Murph about it and yourself about it, but it was really before. I'd say my first memories of watching Cheltenham were a couple of years later than that in the conference. Yeah. But obviously, I've heard the stories. My dad used to go and heard all the stories, seen all the photos. So unfortunately, I was just a little bit too young to take all that in at the time, because I was not yet 6 when you won that league.
So when was your first game?
My first game would have been probably mid-80s. But do you remember there was a grass mound behind the goal? I used to just go and play football up there with my mates and didn't actually watch the games. But Andy Gray, I remember him coming in very clearly in those days, and that's when I sort of got hooked on it really. Bit later on, but yeah, I wasn't expecting any questions today.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, Collie, you were going through a difficult time yourself physically during that run-in, weren't you? You had tonsillitis and some sort of virus, and your collarbone issues, which we'll come to at the Alfchurch game. But you really were struggling towards the end, weren't you?
Yeah, we played. I think we played at Fisher on the Saturday on the second leg. And we had Trowbridge on the Sunday, and like Murph said, you know, we'd taken the defeat on at Fisher, and we travelled down to London on the Friday night. Is that right, Murph? We went down there on the Friday night.
Yeah, we did.
And then we came back, and then we had the Trowbridge game. I played that, and then I got up Monday morning and come down with the tonsillitis, and for me to be off work. You know, it's not often that I've had to do that. So I missed the Gloucester game and I missed the Fisher game. And Murph, being the good manager he was on my case. Collie, I need you for Saturday and that. And it was a case of, you know, needs must. And I was desperate to play. I was gagging to play and listening to the radio and people ringing me. And because in those days we didn't have mobile phones. So I heard all about Boylo's hat-trick on the radio, and then I had the phone call from Boylo telling me about the hat-trick. So, you know, but that was the way it was. And, you know, we came to the Overchurch game knowing that we needed a win. A draw possibly could do it, but we wanted to win the game. And I started the game, and unfortunately, the shoulder went after about half an hour, 40 minutes. and my parents were there, and my wife at the time, she was there, and my brothers and my sisters. And I came off, and nobody wanted to take me to the hospital. So I had to get a taxi. So I get a taxi, and my mum come with me, and I got to the hospital. I still got all in my kit, and basically they said, we can see what the problem is. They put the shoulder straight back in, and I got another taxi back, and I managed to get there with about 5-10 minutes to go. Because when did we score that second goal, Murph, to win that game?
I think it was 79.
Was it the 80th minute? I think.
Yeah. 10 minutes to go, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so I was there, and as you know, everything, and you could say that it wasn't a particularly good game, if I remember, but the big thing that day was the result, and we won it, and we had happy days. And I think, if I remember as well, didn't we have the Player of the Year do that night as well?
But I think we also finished that game with, if I remember right, I'm sure we finished that game with 10 men. Somebody else got injured.
Yeah.
After Collie went off, somebody else got injured. I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
But because I didn't see Boylow's goal, because I went into the changing rooms. I can't remember who was injured now, but somebody was quite badly injured. And then I heard the roar, and I thought, oh, we're down. And when I came back and saw that Boylow had scored, strangely enough, I walked back down the tunnel. After that, I knew, as soon as Boylow had scored, I knew that we'd win the league. I just felt that, just that was, everything galvanised that team. Even Collie getting injured galvanised it. They didn't feel sorry for themselves. And it was quite surprising, the number of players that would play with a genuine injury. Corns, Scarrett, Collie, Averstock, all of them at certain times had quite bad injuries, but they'd always play because
it's like
the adrenaline.
It was like when I dislocated my shoulder. I can always remember a drive. It was at Windsor and Eton, if you remember, Murph. And I went back to the hospital, and they basically said, "Look, son, you're going to be out for 4 or 5 months." And I think Boylow must have been about then as well, because we played. They said you won't play for 4 or 5 months, and I played the following Saturday, and we played at Dorchester in the Trophy. And Boylow, am I right in thinking you scored a hat-trick there as well?
It was in the FA Cup.
FA Cup, was it?
Yeah.
There you go.
I think
we were 3-0, didn't we?
Yeah.
No, it was. We played Dorchester away in the FA Cup.
Yeah.
We were 5-1 up at half time.
That's right, we were, yeah.
And scored 4.
Yeah.
But going back to the Albert Church thing, though, Cole.
Yeah.
Albert Church away.
Yeah.
You dislocated your shoulder.
Yeah. Cornsey, if you remember, Cornsey, the centre forward split Cornsey's head open.
Yeah.
With an elbow, and he had to go off. And he had his. Did he stay off, or did he come back on for that game, Cornsey? Because Cotters
came back on with the bandage, didn't he?
Yeah.
Cotters played centre half in the end.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah, and as I said, the lad had actually done, and in this day and age, he'd have been shown a straight red, no problems. But the lad stayed on, and Cornsey, as I said, I took a nasty whack and had to have stitches. And unfortunately, this lad, I come and went to get him, and my bloody shoulder popped out again. But again, it galvanised the team. Cotters dropped in.
I think we finished the game with 9 players.
Yes, that's right.
We did. We did.
And we won. And we won 1-0.
Yeah.
Who scored the winner, Boyland?
Can't remember.
No. but you talk about galvanising the team. One thing that now in this day and age, the modern day footballer, they talk about training facilities. Now our training facility, come on, Murph, was the Cabbage Patch.
Was at the back, yeah.
Yeah, the Cabbage Patch. Now, whatever it was, we had many a good time on that Cabbage Patch. And there wasn't a lot you could do, but my God, it made the team spirit in that side grow and grow. Because to be quite honest, the Cabbage Patch was a disgrace, Murph, wasn't it?
We weren't too hot on tactics, but we ran around that Cabbage Patch.
Yeah, that's right.
All the time, mile after mile. And the funny thing was, it was a mental thing, because I thought if we were strong mentally, which I knew a lot of the players were, I thought if we were strong physically, and strangely enough, even though we lapped that Cabbage Patch night after night after night, the players actually loved it. They thought it was fun. And, in all that time I was manager, I rarely told a player, what to do. But I thought if I can get them fit they enjoy each other's company, then we're halfway there. And, you know, it was basically the attitude of them then. But we trained on that patch outside the back there, and it was horrendous.
To be fair, looking at today's pitch at Cheltenham is absolutely immaculate.
Ugh.
The pitch we played on that season, I can remember one evening turning up at training, there was yourself, Rod Burge, Arthur, trying to flatten the snow down so we could play on Saturday.
It was, yeah. I know.
Unbelievable.
It was, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Rod and John Turner would get all sorts of pieces of equipment from their businesses and try and get it on that pitch to flatten it down. But in those days, we trained on it, played on it, and you know, it was they'd be aghast now. And Bert Williams used to do a bit of the grounds work as well, and he was do a bit of grounds work, bit of physio, and so it was quite remarkable, really. We had no groundsman.
As I said,
one more.
Sorry, John.
That's right, Colin. You go.
No, I was going to say there's many a tale to be said, and you know, it's probably one of the best experiences I've ever experienced in my career, the time that we had that year. And it's like anything, you take life for granted, and you now look back and you talk about what things went on. You know, I say about the supporters, you know, we travelled away because of the success of the team. We actually had a few overnighters, and I can always remember Derek Goddard and God rest his soul. Now, Derek, as I said, again, being part of the family, he was there travelling on the supporters coach. We got to the hotel and we're all getting off, and we all got our bags with all our stuff and everything. And there's Derek with his Tesco bag. Do you remember that, Mo?
Always incredible. We'd stop for a beer, and Derek would stop for a Chinese meal for two, didn't he? It was incredible.
Yeah.
But that always used to add to it. It was risky. It was a risky plan, and you wouldn't see it nowadays. But we'd often go away, but we'd always have a drink on a Friday night. And you know, I used to whisper to the new players, stay clear of Boylo and Blackler and Babbers and those, and then you're okay. You know, stick with Collie. Collie be straight as a line.
Yeah, well,
are you sure?
I'll tell you another little tale now. We're away one night. Hastings away. Merv actually said, "Collie, do you fancy a pint?" Well, that didn't happen very often, I can assure you. So I thought I'd make the most of this, and it was about, I don't know, 9:30 in the evening, something like that.
Friday night.
I sat there with Murph, and Murph says, "Hey, Collie, isn't this great?" He said, "All the players are tucked up in bed." I said, "Are they?"
Yeah.
Yes, Murph.
I said, "This is great, Collie. Just me and you and the captain, and we'll have a nice quiet beer." I said, all the lads are in." He said, "Murphy said, they've all gone out. I'm here to make sure that you didn't know where they were." So I said, "Well, that's fine, Collie. The pressure's on for the Saturday now." And we won 1-0, didn't we?
And if you remember the Greek, he put the suntan lotion on, and he was on the bench, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And he had because it was a red hot day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Red hot day.
But it all added to it, I think, you know, in the sense of that's the way the players were. I mean, I'll never forget going to Dorchester in the FA Cup. We were just a little bit flat, I thought. And a couple of lads said to me, "Murph, we got a horse running. Can we watch it on the TV in the bar?" I said, this was at 2:00. I'd named the team. So there were about 3 or 4 lads went in the bar to watch the horse race. Arthur came in at 2:30 and said, "Murph, what's going on?" I said, "What's up, Arthur?" He said, "There's 4 players in the bar watching the horse racing." I said, "Well, to be honest, Arthur," I said, "I didn't realise it was going to get long, but they're in there with my permission." Anyway, they came back in. I'm sure Boyler was one of the ones in there, mind you. But Arthur said about this, and Boyler had a hat trick before half time, so it was job done. And often on a Friday night, we'd enjoy ourselves, but we always got the result. So there was never an argument then. So in fairness, Arthur was very good, although Arthur was often worse for wear than we were.
And if I remember, our away form that year was very good, Murph.
It was, yeah. Yeah, it was, yeah. But it's funny you mention, you know, like the teams, they forgot that, you know, RS Southampton, for example, were just on the start, and they had quite a meteoric rise as well. They had a lad up front who was very experienced. I can't remember who it was now, but they were just beginning to have
Mooney
in non-league.
Mooney, it was.
Yes, it was. It was Mooney, wasn't it? That's right. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah, and I got a feeling that after us, they got a couple of promotions, but then, as did happen with a lot of those type of clubs, they'd have a meteoric rise, and then, the money would dry up, and that would be that.
Mm. We've heard about Collie's tribulations at the Alvechurch game, but Boylo, am I right in thinking you had a bit of an incident on the Saturday morning of that game as well at work?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I went into work. I was working on a trade counter, plumbing trade counter, and with stock taking, and I got my fingers trapped between two metal buckets and stripped all the skin off my fingers. So I went up to the hospital that morning, and blood everywhere and everything, and they said, "Oh, right, okay," strapped them all up. We'll have to have a look at them again in a couple of days' time to see if you need skin grafts, because it ripped all the skin off. And I was like, "Oh, okay." I said, "I'm meant to be playing football this afternoon." He said, "Well, you can't play football." I said, "Well, it's only my hands. Surely I'm okay." And she said, No, we do not recommend you play football this afternoon. I said, "Well, okay." And I just agreed with them. They wrapped my fingers up and everything, and I just went home, got my kit bag, and I was off playing. There was no way I was going to miss that last game unless I'd broken my leg or something like that. There was not a chance, in my career, I'd never won a league like that before, and to me, this was my one opportunity of getting in the conference at that time. I'd always looked at other clubs, played against conference clubs, thinking, I'd love to play in that league, and this is my one chance, really.
Murph, did you know anything this was going on in the morning of the Saturday of the game, or was it just business as usual for you when Boylo turned up?
But no, in fairness, that's the nature of how a lot of players were. They'd have, if they had an issue, basically, they'd turn up and they'd play. I mean, bear in mind, as a player, I remember playing at home in the FA Cup, and in a very important game. And Dennis Allen, I was captain of the side then, and Dennis pulled me aside and said, "Oh, this particular player, he can't play because he stepped on the Hoover and he's injured his toe," and he didn't play. But to be honest with you, if you're going to win anything, you've got to be of sterner stuff than that. And it didn't surprise me that I would say we had probably 7 or 8 players that would have played under any circumstances, and that was the difference between winning and losing, and that was the mentality of which they gave. But of course, that also rubbed off on others as well, because there was, like, Collie was due to be out for a period of time, but there was no hesitation in playing the following week, and that was, that characters like that, they only come up now and again. And normally, when you get that group together with a little bit of quality, it often means you are in contention for something then.
Who was harder, Baverstock or Scarrett?
Well, I mean, Scarrett was probably one of the best left backs the club has ever had, but he won't mind me saying it. He could never completely focus on the football. The worst thing he ever did, I think, was going to Swindon. I remember Bob Etheridge saying, we played a game at Woodden Road. He said, "That's the best left back I've ever seen." And bear in mind, Bob was at Bristol City and all sorts of places. Steve made the mistake of going to Swindon, and yet I think there were too many other distractions and everything else. When he came back, he was as tough and strong. He'd tackle you, and you were well tackled. He was brilliant, but he was another one who played below the levels he should have played at, but he was hard as nails. Baver was a tough competitor, but whereas the Greek would have gone in and through you, Baver would have lifted his shins and he'd have done you. So there was a difference, but Scarrett was a tough customer.
I can tell you a little bit more about Greek. I as you know, I spent 2 or 3 years at Swindon, and I've got to know John Trollope, who holds the most appearances for Swindon Town at left back. And the one thing that he said in all his time at Swindon Town, the only time he ever felt threatened was when Greek was there.
Yeah.
So that tells you a lot about the Greek.
Yeah.
He had his physique and his power would be something that if you were looking to build a footballer, that's what it would be. He had a terrific left foot. He had absolutely everything. But he was too easily pleased, and he didn't get that just that push that he needed from somewhere just to go on to the next level. He was content with his lot, but certainly I played with a lot of good left backs, Julian Laley, and all these, and I see now that Jamie Victory and Hussey would all come into those realms. But I guarantee you that Steve Scarrett would have stood the test of time with any of those players. Perhaps not as prolific going forward as Hussey and Victory, but very, very little would get past him.
Let's have a little chat about. Sorry, Collie, after you.
I was going to say, one of the games I can always remember with the Greek, Murph, and perhaps you can shed a little bit on this. I can remember probably one of the biggest games of the season was when we played Kings Lynn at home.
Yeah.
Can you remember Greek going head to head?
Yeah.
With the centre forward?
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, the centre forward.
Yeah.
Jimmy Cabia.
Yeah.
That
was it. Yeah. Yeah.
And they went head to head, literally, to the point that I think Cabia laid the nut on Greek.
Did, yeah.
In front of the main stand.
Yeah.
And Greek took it.
Yeah.
And Cabia got shown a straight red.
Yeah.
And, as I said, but that's the sort of characters that we had within that team, within that squad. And again, with Greek was a local lad, Cheltenham boy.
Yeah. Well, I say Stuart Corns was the same. He kind of, he'd play through thick and thin in those time frames. And he was another one that, often was injured and physically always struggled a little bit, with his weight and everything. But, terrific, tenacious player. Gosh.
Collie,
sorry, go on.
The day you've talked about the sort of adventure you had going to hospital, coming back just in time before the end of the game, but you were there luckily, still in your kit to get the shield.
Yeah.
With there's a great picture that everyone will see this weekend of you being given the shield with your sling, crowd all on the pitch behind you. Do all three of you remember that moment really clearly when you got the shield, job was done, and the celebrations could begin? Although, Murph, I know you were trying to sign players, but do you remember that moment? How sweet was that moment?
Well, being a local lad, it meant an awful lot to me, and I know it did to John and all the players. It was, again, unfortunately, life goes too quick. That here we are talking about what happened 35 years ago, and I was fortunate I was involved in 1 or 2 promotions. I got promoted with Trowbridge to the conference a few years before that. But it meant an awful lot more for me personally to be captain of my hometown club. And the atmosphere that day was as good as any game that I've ever been involved in.
It was funny, actually, because a lot of times I found that when you were looking towards the latter part of a season, I had this when I was at Trowbridge, funny enough, when we needed to win the league. We played a team that really weren't going anywhere, but it's the same with Kings Lynn, is that they tried twice as hard. It was, and on the line, I remember early on, it was very argumentative on the line with their manager, and you thought, where have they got this desire from not to let us win the league? If they'd have had that desire throughout the season, they'd be competing with us. And strangely enough, they really cancelled us out, made it a very, very difficult game. And the penalty was kind of hotly contested by them as well. And there was quite a long time went. And so strangely enough, the game, the one thing that we did well on the game is that we didn't lose our focus to make sure we didn't concede anything silly, because we could have done, because they weren't a bad side and they had a number of players that actually came through over recent years. But I remember Brian Hughes' penalty probably as vivid as I can remember anything about any game I ever managed, played, or anything else in. I just remember, Hughesy looked such a spindly little thing running up there, and I just kept thinking, Hughesy, whatever you do, smash it. And he just ran up there and he trickled it into the corner. So
he never smashed a penalty.
Never ever, no. But
you must have been good at them, though.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
He was.
Yeah, he was. So
I can't remember much of the presentation or anything after the game, but I can remember the game quite vividly, and the pressure towards the end.
Yeah.
It was more relief, really, for me, that we'd actually got over the line because of what had gone on in the previous weeks, losing the Southern League Cup final and games Saturdays, Sundays, you know, and it was a combination of things really. Just for me, it was a relief to get over the line, and the amount of people who had said to us during the season when we had our sticky patches, we had quite a few. At one stage, I think we were below halfway in the league.
Yeah.
And, yeah, all those sticky patches, people say, well, you ain't going to win nothing this season. You won't win nothing. I can remember 2 or 3 games we played. I think it was Fareham away, and we lost. And I was walking off with Brian Hughes, and a lad come up to me and Hughes here and went, you ain't winning nothing, boys. You ain't winning nothing. And Brian said to me, and going back to what you said, Murph, about Brian's sort of willpower to win, said, Boyland, don't worry, we just show a winner's medal at the end of the season. And that sticks in my mind then. And several other games, the Irish Southampton game, where I think we were behind to start with, and we come back 1-3-2. Geordie scored the winner. Just all these little things that suddenly, the last game of the season, it had to be the last game of the season. It was just such a relief, such a relief.
Yeah. You were promised a week away, is that right? And you ended up having the famous weekend in Ostend. So we've got to hear a little bit about that.
But the famous weekend in Ostend.
Yeah.
It was the same weekend, or the weekend after Heysel.
That's right, it was, yeah.
So we got to Ostend and we couldn't get into any bars.
The High Court
at all. Because we were English, they weren't letting anybody in the bars, which made life rather difficult. But we did overcome in the end, one way or another. Didn't we, Cole?
We certainly did, Boiler.
It's quite funny, actually, because I had the Daily Telegraph ring me on the morning that we were going and saying, is it true that you're going to Ostend? And I said, well, yeah, we won the league, we're having a trip. And we were the first English team, they pictured it as the first English team to go overseas after the Heysel incident. So, of course, suddenly all eyes were upon us. And then we had some right snakes on that trip as well. So I thought, how on earth are we going to cope, with this? And I've got a feeling we actually took a few players with us who were signing for the new season, weren't we? Kevin Badley came.
I think he was signed that season, John, but he got injured during the title-winning season, I think.
I think he did, because he definitely came, I know, and a number of others. But it was. What
are you saying, that Kevin Badley's a snake?
Well, I'm afraid so. Yes. Because I remember saying to lads, I said, whatever you do, we've got to stay out of trouble. And so, of course, Kevin was, typical Swindon lad. He just took trouble in his stride. So we were in a bar, and you could feel there was a little bit of atmosphere. And I remember saying to Kevin, I said, Kevin, is everything all right? Yeah, he said, I'm fine, Murph. And he pulled out of his back of his trouser leg, and he had a pool cue. I said, Kevin, we can't go causing any trouble. This is what they're expecting of us. But that was a typical Swindon lad. He said, well, I always go out on a Saturday night with a pool cue. So.
Why Ostend? Who picked Ostend in the end? It seems quite random from us, but was it the place to go to for a drink in those days?
The word is it was Murph.
I can't remember now.
I think we were promised somewhere a little bit more exotic, but
yes,
yeah,
we were promised a week away, Boiler.
I think that
Arthur was such a cheapskate, wasn't he?
Done.
I think Arthur chose Ostend. He was such a cheapskate. I think we were promised something more exotic, but I think time was running out, and I don't know why Ostend. But of course, we couldn't have picked a worse weekend because of the circumstances. Everybody was slightly on tenterhooks. So, but there were some stories that will stick with us. That's for sure.
Yeah, some things will have to stay private.
I'm afraid they will. Yeah, I'm afraid they will, Boiler.
So we've got 35 years on now, and like you said, Collie, time goes very quickly. But 35 years on, most of you, I think the vast majority of people who are part of that achievement are still good mates to this day, aren't they? And how much special is that you can still meet up and chat about those days?
I think it means a lot. It just proves what we did have. And another point that would be valid is you look at that squad of players, Merv, and then you look at how many of those players have actually been involved in managing sides around the counties. Tim Harris, Greek, Boylo, Uzi, Baba, Abs, Geordie.
I remember thinking at one stage, I think of that team, I think nine players actually became managers.
Yeah.
Amazing, isn't it? That is amazing.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah, I can't think of the others, but there were 9.
A lot of leaders in the squad.
Yeah, there were, yes, yeah.
But there is another little story. The thing that Murph seems to forget to tell you, the reason that Boylo come along and had a good reputation was that when Murph marked him in the games that he played against him, Murph made him look a good player.
You sure it was mine and not yours, Collie?
We won't go there, Murph. We won't go there, Murph. We won't go there.
No, it's nice when you see each other, and a lot of actually the club has done quite well in the last few years in players coming back, and it's always loads have come back in recent times. Neil Goff, Chris Townsend, and that is fantastic. And the one thing, whenever you see those players, they've always got a smile on their face, and that's the one thing, because they don't have to say anything to each other. But it's almost like we know. And Collie and I speak, almost weekly. I've seen a lot of Boylo at the recent games and things, and it is fantastic that after all that time, that the relationship, to be honest with you, hasn't changed, and that's a testimony to the character of those players. Fantastic.
But I think also, Murph, it's a testament to the football club.
Yeah.
Inviting us back and making us feel welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I know from a personal point of view, I look forward to going back there. I had some great times there 35 years ago, and for people still to remember and recognise what you achieved 35 years ago is fantastic. I can't speak highly enough of the football club. Actually, welcoming us back. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and I think also, which is good, is that a lot of the supporters that still come, even going back to that era, even with teams that have gone on, and Cottrell's team, Gary Johnson's team, the team that Michael Duff has put together, people still look at those times and quite favourably put players into those categories of the modern day player. And that's the interesting thing, is that a lot of those players, Boylo probably in particular more than anybody, has stood the test of time, and actually now is a modern day player of that ilk, if you see what I mean, would have transferred that time frame and would have been probably more comfortable now with better players on better surfaces. It's frightening to imagine what some would have done. So
yeah, it took a few years to get to the football league after that, but do you feel like, when you see the ground now and what's been done, and 20 seasons in the football league now, that was a significant step, wasn't it? Getting into a national division for the first time.
I thought that was the stepping stone. I felt Dennis Allen had started it off. He gave the players a belief, and what Dennis did very, very well, he introduced a lot of local players, and Cheltenham became part of Cheltenham. But there's no doubt that was the stepping stone. I mean, I don't know whether Steve Cottrell will admit to it, but he learnt an enormous amount from those players of the day. And, from that stint, I felt a lot of what he did, was embedded in those early days. And, where the club are now, the only slight regret I had is I genuinely felt we could have got there a little bit sooner if the club had been a little bit more ambitious at that time. But we let too many good players go. Angel, Boyland, Townsend, Hughes, all went over the same time frame, and the club got a bit blasé because we'd signed a good player. They thought there was a conveyor belt, but it's not always the case. But no, it's fantastic where the club have got to, and that was possibly one of the early foundation steps to where they are now.
And Collie and Boylo, you played a big part in that as well. So you've certainly played a big part in that first chapter on the rise up to the Football League, really.
Yeah. And I also think our first season in the conference, I don't know what the other fellas think, but I think we could have done better than that.
Yeah, we could, yeah.
I just think when I look back at the season, I think we were just happy to be in that league. and compete in 1 or 2 games and then really not actually believe that we could actually achieve anything. Because we were a strong side and we had some good additions, the likes of Steve Brooks, Kevin Willits came, and people like that. And I think we could have done a lot better, really.
Yeah, we could. Yeah,
I don't think we believed it. We didn't really believe it.
No.
The one game that sticks out for me, Murph, was when we did win promotion. If I'm right in thinking, did we play Maidstone United first game?
Yeah, Hughes scored. Hughes scored, didn't he?
Yeah, but if you remember that game, these lads, they came by train.
Yeah.
They didn't come up by coach. They came, and this was unheard of. And we gone there. We got Maidstone United coming to Cheltenham Town for the first time, and we put in a spirited performance, and deservedly so. I think we won it 1-0, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, Hughes scored, didn't he?
Yeah. See,
I think it might have been. Did Boylo? Did you score Boylo in that game as well?
I think it was a draw, wasn't it?
No,
we won 1-0, didn't we?
Yeah, I think Cheltenham won. Yeah.
I think Hughes scored in the first half. I remember it quite clearly.
See, the one thing that one thing that I've got on Boylo is the fact that, as Murph's talking about Dennis Allen, I will always be grateful for Dennis giving me my debut at 16. Yeah. But I can also remember, Murph, and you probably played in 1 or 2 games like it, where we played at Wadden Road in front of 100, 150, 200 people.
Yeah.
So to go and see how the club has changed from then to what it was, and now even further, is just top dollar.
It's staggering, I think, as to where the club are, and in the sense that there's still an element of being kind of a small fish in a big pond, and yet the club still maintain a level of achievement. They've been into League One. All these things, it's quite staggering, really, as to where they've gone on. But the one thing that does seem to run through Cheltenham Town is, over the years, you get a group of players that are fantastic characters. They really want to play for Cheltenham Town. You wonder why. A lot of them could be elsewhere, but you get that level of spirit, and then you go on from there. But say 20 years in the Football League is quite staggering, because when we started off, the big guns like Enfield, Altrincham, Scarborough's, they seem head and shoulders above us. But to be above a lot of those teams is quite remarkable.
2-1 it was. I just checked against Maidstone. Brooks got the first, and then Hughesy got the winner.
That's right. I thought he did. Yeah. But I think Boylo's right, is that we were very apprehensive, because we weren't sure what to expect. We knew a lot of these teams were very professional. A lot of them had full-time players and full-time managers. They travelled well. They were overnight and things like this. And so we weren't sure. But as the season unfolded, there were certain performances that made us realise that we were equally as good as these. But that was the first time, actually, a lot of players had come under the radar and they weren't approached. When we started that season and players started to do well, then all of a sudden, people started, looking at them. Brett Angel started it off, I think, and all of a sudden, teams were after him, where we should have held our nerve and kept him. Because I had the conversation with Arthur. I said, Arthur, we had Boyland, Townsend, and Angel up front, Brooks in behind. We were in the verge of signing Peter Shearer. We had Verkafs and Crowley at the back, and Collicutt had a lot of Hughes, a lot of Baverstock was in his prime. And when you look at a lot of those names, but we let too many players go at the wrong time. And I'll never forget, we played the trophy quarter final with Darren Angel and Mark Buckland up front. And who knows? We'd beaten Telford the week before. We lost to Telford, and the writing was on the wall after that, to be honest with you.
See, a game that I can remember was when we travelled to Scarborough.
Yeah.
We had the pleasure of staying overnight, which didn't happen often. And John Powell had just signed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the manager at Scarborough at the time was Neil.
It's Warnock. Yeah, it was Warnock. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And we went there and we played really, really well. and Towner, I think, scored.
Yeah.
And it was either a 1-0 win, was it, or 2-0?
3-1. We won 3-1. Town scored 2.
Yeah, and then we played the game, and Murph said, "Right, I'll get the drinks in." Well, that never happened, Boylo, did it? But we and if you remember, we went to the bar, and then we looked out, and he's got the whole squad running.
Yeah.
Out on the pitch, because they were top of the table at the time. And that year,
I
think
they won it, didn't they?
Yeah, they went on to win the league.
We drew at home 3-3.
Yeah.
Good memory, Boylo. Very good memory.
Yeah.
Certain games you remember, mate. The left back scored the equaliser. We were 3-2 up. Left back scored, and he went on to play for Ipswich. I can't remember his name. Thompson, I think his name was.
Yeah. Neil Thompson, wasn't it? Was it
Yeah.
Neil Thompson? Yeah. Big stocky lad, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Kim.
But
Kim.
that previous season, pre-season, Murph, we went to Harrogate.
Yeah.
It's only sort of after the game, etc., people were telling me that certain clubs were looking at me and what have you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, because I've never been told anything, and either way, was there actually anybody watching? Apparently Leeds and Middlesbrough were mentioned, but I don't know how true that was.
There were always, to be honest with you, Boyler, there was, especially when we went up the level, there were always teams looking. Strangely enough, the year we won the league, we never picked up any vibes about anybody looking at anybody. And when we signed players like Baverstock and Hughes, we were never in any competition for them. Nobody actually wanted them, if you see what I mean. So it came to us. After that, it was quite a strange time, because up until Brett Angel, then nobody had actually. A lot of teams would come and look, and the rumour would be Bristol City under Terry Cooper were the main one. Bristol City were very, very keen. But the thing is that a lot of times is that I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what they were looking. I'm not sure, what some teams were looking for. But a lot of teams looked. I mean, yourself was always the focal point. But the same with Steve Brooks came. Loads of teams are looking at Steve Brooks, but nobody actually came in. I thought, well, you'd be hard pressed to get better players than that. And yet with Brett Angel, they saw him play twice and took him, and it was quite strange, really. It was, and I don't know why, because Boylo had far more attributes than Brett and would have been as equally as successful. And yet with Brett, he went from, literally playing, not sure whether he was going to play centre half or centre forward. And the next moment, I was being rung by Kenny Dalglish, asking me what was he like. And, he was going off to all sorts of places. He went Everton, and he was going to I think Dalglish was at Blackburn at the time. But all of a sudden, he was going all sorts of places for huge amounts of money. And I suppose that's how, that little bit of luck, isn't it, really?
Did you throw everyone off the scent, Murph, like you did with George Rooney at the Banbury game?
I always did. I mean,
I like it, John. Yeah, I like it.
I have to do. I did. I put players off the scent of all those I wanted to keep, and certainly Boyler was always in that category. I say, "Oh, don't touch him with the barge pole. He causes you nothing but trouble." And do you know what? It worked. But strangely enough, there were no player. Even Brett Angel. Brett didn't want to go. And what very few people realise, at the time Derby County came in for Brett, he was non-contract. They could have had him for nothing. So I had his contract in the bottom drawer in the office. So I said to Arthur, we better get that bit of paper out sharpish, Arthur. So, but it was strange how they were very impetuous, because we played Birmingham City in pre-season, and I think we beat Birmingham City 5-1. I think Brett got a hat-trick. And after the game, their manager came in to talk, and he was talking with Arthur, and Arthur said something about Brett, and he said, "Oh, he'll never make a footballer. He don't know which leg." And I thought, that's strange, for the fact I've got a feeling it was the following season we played them then, because Birmingham weren't interested, and we beat Birmingham 5-1, and Brett got a hat trick against them then. So that shows even people of that experience didn't really know. But I was always surprised, you know, that people didn't take a number of Brooks, Boyland. I mean, they would have taken Shearer. Shearer had lots of offers, and there was £500,000 on the table, but he got injured. But of all the players to go through the entire time frame, I mean, in fairness, Wickham came in for Boylo and were precise. You know, they wanted him. They paid for him. They desperately wanted someone of that ilk to play in that way, and so. You know.
To be fair, Murph, I was probably the likes of like when Brett went and etc. I was 26, 27 then. So for me to go to a league club then was probably never going to happen, really. I needed to be sort of 22, 23, I expect, really.
I agree. It was a different time, wasn't it? In the sense that Football League, they often took players, but they were all young players that they thought they could influence them from a young age and take them all the way through. They rarely took players over the age of 24, 25, 26. And, you know, it just didn't happen. I mean, I don't know what age Vardy went into the league, but in recent years, players have gone into the league at much greater ages. But Boylo's right. It was almost like, oh, you know, he's kind of, they would associate them with being non-league players. And even the conference in those days was non-league, as it was always referred to as non-league. And Brett was one of those. I don't know why Brett stood out, but I remember we played, I know we played a team on the Saturday, and the goalkeeper was going to Tottenham on the Monday, and it was his last game. I can't remember who the team were, but the goalkeeper was definitely going to Tottenham, and we beat them 2 or 3-0. And Brett was absolute. Brett headed the ball out of his hands in the goal, and he scored a couple more. And of course, there was a lot of people actually watching the goalkeeper, and they saw Brett like that, and they signed Brett on the back of 2 or 3 games, really.
Right, guys, I think we'll wrap it up there. But thanks for giving us so many great memories there.
Brilliant. Thanks.
The fans will absolutely love that. Obviously, fans of a certain age will absolutely love that, but it's still very fondly remembered by a big chunk of the fan base that will always, you know, you lot will always be their heroes, whatever the club does now.
Brilliant.
So thanks for taking the time to have a little bit of a reminisce.
Brilliant. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Very enjoyable.
Appreciate that.
Just
Take care, Boylo.
One thing that I would like to say is the passing of Jasper this week. You know, a fella that I got to know through my days playing and representing Gloucestershire. You know, Jasper was a great character, and he'd be sorely lost. So, you know, just
that's
to
nice, Collie,
send my condolences on to his family.
Yeah, we'll echo that, Carl.
Yeah.
It's
Thanks
funny actually with Jasper. I only ever spoke to Jasper once until I got to know him at Cheltenham, and the only we played. I played for Bishop's Cleeve against St Mark's, and I was marking Tony Price, who was supposed to be the real thing in those days. And as I came off the pitch, the only thing Jasper ever said to me for 25 years, he said, "You're the dirtiest player I've ever seen."
Well, he wasn't wrong.
No. I said, "Oh, thanks for that, Jas."